You won't believe what happened at my daughter-in-law's wedding reception. She called me a family embarrassment right in front of all the guests, laughing at me like I was nothing. But what happened next completely shocked everyone. Let me tell you the whole story. It's one you won't forget. I arrived at the reception feeling a little nervous. I had chosen a simple, elegant dress. Nothing flashy, just something I felt comfortable and respectable in. I wanted to celebrate my son Ethan and his new wife, Zoe, without causing any fuss. But the moment I stepped into the room, I could feel Zoe's eyes on me, sharp and cold. She leaned over to a friend and whispered something, her lips curling into that sly smile I had learned to recognize. Then, without any warning, she turned to me and said it loud enough for everyone near our table to hear. "Oh, look at Louise. Always so cheap. Pathetic, really. What a family embarrassment." A ripple of laughter ran through the guests. Some tried to hide their amusement, while others openly smirked. I froze. My heart pounded, and a flush of shame and hurt burned across my face. I wanted to vanish, to disappear somewhere no one could see the embarrassment I felt. I had raised Ethan with love, with sacrifices no one had ever seen, and here I was being humiliated in front of the very people I had hoped would accept me. I tried to keep my composure. I smiled faintly, saying a quiet, "Congratulations, Zoe," hoping she would stop. But she wasn't finished. Her words were cruel and deliberate, meant to cut, meant to embarrass. I felt the weight of the room pressing down on me, every chuckle, every sideways glance making me smaller. Then suddenly something unexpected happened. Zoe's father, Jackson, who had been talking to a group nearby, turned toward me. His face went pale. He froze completely, as if someone had struck him. His eyes widened, fixed on me, and for a moment, the laughter and whispers around us seemed to vanish. I noticed his hand tremble slightly as he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving mine. The room grew quiet, guests sensing the sudden tension. Jackson's recognition of me brought a sudden shift in the energy of the reception. The cruel spotlight Zoe had tried to put on me shifted, and all eyes were now on the father who suddenly seemed unsettled, almost haunted. In that instant, I realized this was no ordinary wedding humiliation. Something in Jackson's face told me that my past, long buried and hidden, was about to change the atmosphere of this celebration forever. The power in Zoe's mockery faltered, replaced by confusion and unease. What had started as a moment meant to shame me was about to take a turn no one saw coming. And just like that, the reception that began with laughter at my expense became the beginning of a revelation that would shock everyone present. I want you to understand who I really am before that awful reception. I'm Louise, and my life hasn't been easy. Years ago, I found myself alone, raising my son Ethan as a single mother after his father walked out. I was young, scared, and unprepared, but I promised myself that Ethan would never feel the kind of loss I had felt. Every day since then became a fight, not against anyone else, but against the odds stacked against us. I worked long hours, taking jobs that left me exhausted, just so Ethan could have the things I never had. School supplies, clothes that fit, tutors when he struggled, none of it came without sacrifice. I gave up my own dreams silently. I wanted to travel, to study, to experience life, but I didn't. My world revolved around Ethan. Every choice I made, every late night I spent worrying about bills or helping with homework, I did for him. I wanted him to grow up strong, confident, and with opportunities one had never been given. Through all of it, I built my life quietly. I learned to hold my head high even when wealthier relatives would look down on me. Their subtle judgments stung, comments about my clothes, my modest home, the way I spoke, but I never let them see me falter. I taught myself dignity, and I carried it with pride, even if the world often measured me by things I could not change. I wasn't rich, I wasn't flashy, but I had strength and I had love. That was enough for Ethan, and for me, that was everything. I never remarried. I focused on my son entirely, pouring my heart and soul into giving him a life I had imagined only in my dream. Every milestone he achieved felt like my victory. Every success he earned felt like a reward for the years of sacrifice I had quietly endured. I never complained, never demanded recognition. I believed that the quiet work of a mother, of a woman building a life against the odds, was enough, and in my heart, it was. When Ethan met Zoe, I thought maybe our lives were about to change in a beautiful way. I imagined her as someone who would care for him, who would love him, and perhaps even accept me as part of her life. I longed for acceptance, not just for me, but for the motherly place I had always hoped to hold in my son's life. I pictured family dinners, smiles exchanged, a sense of belonging that I had always dreamed about. I told myself that if Zoe truly loved Ethan, she would see me, not as a threat or an inconvenience, but as someone who had given everything for the man she loved. I held on to that hope. Even as the years of sacrifice weighed on me, I believed in the simple idea that love could create family, that respect could bridge our differences. Little did I know that hope would be tested in ways I never imagined, and that the moment I had anticipated for so long could become the very place where my dignity would be challenged. Yet even in that anticipation, I clung to the belief that my life's quiet sacrifices mattered, that my love for Ethan would always speak louder than judgment or scorn. Ethan met Zoe during their sophomore year of college. She was stunning, confident, and seemed to have the kind of life that drew attention effortlessly. I remember the first time I met her. I wanted to like her, I really did. She shook my hand politely, smiled, and complimented the little apartment Ethan and I shared. But there was something in her tone, a faint edge I couldn't ignore, like she was noting every small imperfection and comparing it to what she was used to. At first, it was subtle. Zoe would comment on my clothes, the simple dresses I wore to events or family gatherings. "Oh, that's nice," she would say with a soft laugh, like she was humoring me rather than complimenting me. She would glance around our modest home with her nose just slightly raised and make little remarks about Ethan's cooking or the furniture, asking, "Do you always use these brands? Or this is what you serve?" It wasn't overt cruelty, but it stung in a quiet, persistent way. Ethan, of course, didn't notice, or refused to. He was smitten, completely taken by her charm, her ambition, and her charm that seemed effortless. If I hesitated or tried to caution him about Zoe's subtle jabs, he would brush it off. "Mom, you're reading too much into it. She's just teasing. Don't be so sensitive." I saw him defending her over and over, and I understood why. He wanted to believe in the perfect image of a partner he loved. I began to sense that Zoe's priorities were different from mine. Where I valued warmth, care, and loyalty, Zoe seemed drawn to appearances and status. She asked questions about Ethan's future income, about where he planned to live, and she casually mentioned wanting to travel in luxury, even as a student. I could see how easily she measured people by their possessions and family connections, not by their hearts. Yet I stayed quiet. I reminded myself that Ethan's happiness came first. I didn't want to cause tension or make him feel conflicted over love. If Zoe treated me with condescension, it was a small price to pay for his joy. I chose to smile through the subtle digs, to nod politely at her comments, and to maintain a calm presence. I watched Ethan light up whenever she was around, how he laughed at her jokes, and how he seemed to glow in her attention. That was worth enduring discomfort in my mind. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling in my chest, a quiet warning that Zoe's charm might hide a more calculating side. I saw the way she sized up our modest furniture, the way her eyes lingered on my worn dishes and old curtains, and I felt the tension between her world and mine. But every time I considered speaking out, I reminded myself, this was Ethan's choice. My role was to love him, support him, and hope that in time, Zoe would show the same warmth and kindness that I had always given freely. So I endured, quietly observing, listening, and learning. Every interaction taught me a little more about Zoe's priorities, and every smile I forced was for Ethan's sake. I kept my doubts to myself, holding on to the hope that love could bridge the gap between our very different worlds, even if the signs pointed in another direction. When Ethan told me he and Zoe were engaged, I was overjoyed. I imagined a celebration full of family, laughter, and shared happiness. But as the wedding planning began, I quickly realized that things wouldn't be as simple as I had hoped. Zoe started making decisions without including me, even on matters that I thought were important. Invitations to bridal showers and dress fittings never arrived, and any suggestion I made was politely ignored or dismissed. It felt as though I was no longer part of my own son's life in these big moments. At first, I tried to brush it off. Ethan would always say, "Mom, she just wants things her way. Don't take it personally." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that Zoe's behavior wasn't malicious, that it was just part of the excitement of planning a wedding. But the more it happened, the harder it became to ignore. Zoe's choices always seemed to highlight a sense of superiority, choosing extravagant venues, designer dresses, and gourmet menus that subtly criticized the simpler life I had built. I suppressed my hurt because I didn't want to create conflict. I reminded myself constantly that Ethan's happiness mattered more than my feeling. I told myself I would endure being sidelined, being ignored, and being left out, as long as Ethan was happy and excited about his future. I smiled, nodded, and congratulated Zoe whenever she spoke about her plans, even though inside my heart ached at the exclusion. It wasn't just the events themselves, it was the way Zoe made me feel invisible. When I offered advice or opinions, she would smile in that polite way, but immediately return to her plans, as if she had never heard me. I started noticing patterns. How she would casually belittle my contributions, hinting that my choices were outdated or not good enough. There was a subtle cruelty in the way she carried herself, a way of asserting control over every detail while keeping me at a distance. Privately, I began to see her manipulative nature more clearly. It wasn't just about the wedding, It was about power, about creating an image that placed her family above mine and diminishing me in the process. Each slight, each exclusion, was a reminder that she valued appearances and status over kindness or connection. I started reflecting on her behavior toward me over the past months, realizing that the polite smiles and compliments had always carried a hint of condescension. Still, I held my tongue. I had learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when they risked hurting someone I loved. My role was to support Ethan, even when it meant swallowing my pride and keeping my distance. I reminded myself that enduring this was temporary, that it was part of the process of letting Ethan build his new life. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing awareness. Zoe's charm was a mask, and behind it, she was calculated, careful to control situations to her advantage. The wedding, which I had hoped would be a joyful merging of families, was slowly revealing the truth I had sensed all along. This wasn't going to be the warm, welcoming celebration I had imagined. And though I stayed quiet outwardly, inside, I braced myself, watching closely, knowing that the real test of patience and strength was yet to come. The reception was in full swing, filled with music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that this was a day for celebration. I wanted to greet Zoe sincerely, to offer my congratulations as a mother welcoming her new daughter-in-law into the family. I approached her with a smile, careful to be warm and polite. "Congratulations, Zoe. You look beautiful," I said, genuinely hoping to share in her happiness. Instead of a smile or a gracious reply, I saw her expression twist. Zoe's lips curled into a sneer, and she raised her voice just enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Look at Louise," she said, her tone sharp and mocking. "Always so ordinary. That dress. Honestly, it's pathetic. You're a real family embarrassment, aren't you?" The words hit me like a blow. A few guests giggled, some whispering to each other, and others stared in surprised curiosity. I felt a rush of heat to my face, embarrassment mixing with hurt. My first instinct was to respond, to defend myself, but Ethan froze beside me, his expression torn. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He wanted to protect me, but he also didn't want to confront his new wife, his pride caught in the middle. I took a careful step back, trying to shrink into myself, to escape the sudden attention. My hands trembled slightly as I moved toward a quieter corner of the room, hoping to slip away unnoticed. I focused on steadying my breath, reminding myself that humiliation was fleeting, and that my years of sacrifice and dignity could not be undone by a cruel comment. Then, something unexpected happened. Jackson, Zoe's father, who had been mingling with other guests, suddenly stopped mid-conversation. His eyes locked on me, and I noticed his expression change instantly. His face drained of color, and his posture stiffened. He stepped closer, his gaze fixed, as if recognizing something he had long tried to forget. I froze, sensing that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The laughter and whispers around us seemed to fade, replaced by the tension radiating from Jackson. Guests began to notice the sudden stillness, turning their heads to see what had captured his attention so completely. His eyes didn't waver from mine, and for a moment, it felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of us. I could feel the weight of his recognition before he spoke. There was something in his face, a mixture of shock, disbelief, and perhaps guilt. Zoe, too, noticed the change and followed her father's gaze toward me. Her smug expression faltered for the first time, replaced by a flicker of unease. In that instant, the reception that had begun with laughter at my expense shifted in a way no one could have predicted. Zoe's cruel words, meant to humiliate me, were suddenly overshadowed by the unspoken acknowledgement from her own father. And as he took a step forward, the room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would happen next, a revelation that would change everything in ways none of us could yet imagine. The room fell into an uneasy silence as Jackson took a deliberate step toward me. His eyes never left mine, and his face, pale and tense, seemed almost haunted. He raised a hand, calling out in a voice that carried authority but also shock. "Louise, we need to talk. Now." Guests stopped mid-conversation, forks hovering in the air, glasses paused, as all eyes turned toward us. The music faded into a quiet background. Zoe looked confused at first, then concerned, as her father's gaze seemed to pierce right through me. She opened her mouth, ready to protest, but something in Jackson's expression made her pause. He reached me, standing so close that I could see the lines of tension around his eyes, the way his hands shook ever so slightly. "Louise," he said again, this time quieter, almost a whisper, but loaded with emotion. I can't believe it's really you." My heart skipped a beat. Recognition flashed in his eyes, but there was more than surprise. There was regret, guilt, and something heavy unspoken. The guests exchanged puzzled glances, murmuring softly among themselves, but the words remained caught in their throats. Jackson was staring at me like he had seen a ghost from the past. "I knew you," he said finally, his voice steadying. Long ago, before everything changed. Before I made choices I shouldn't have. His gaze softened, almost painfully, as he continued. Louise, I'm your son's father. I left you when you needed me most, and I've regretted it every single day since. The room froze. Ethan, standing nearby, felt a shift in the air, his brow furrowing as he tried to process the revelation. Zoe's mouth fell open in horror. Her face, once full of smug satisfaction at my supposed embarrassment, drained of color. She suddenly realized the truth. In mocking me, she had humiliated the woman who had raised her fiancé, the mother of a man who shared blood with her own father. Jackson's confession hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The guests were silent, too shocked to respond, as the reality of his words sank in. My knees felt weak, not from fear, but from the intensity of the moment. Decades of buried memories, pain, and resilience pressed into the present, converging in a single, breathtaking revelation. I could see Zoe's mind racing. She looked from me to her father, her confidence shattered. The cruel satisfaction she had felt moments ago vanished, replaced by a dawning realization that she had misjudged and humiliated someone far more significant than she could have imagined. Ethan, still frozen, stared at his father with disbelief, then back at me. The connections that had been hidden, the truths kept secret for years, were suddenly laid bare in front of everyone. The room felt charged, every whisper and breath amplified by the shock of the revelation. Jackson took a step back, his hand on his chest as if to steady himself. Louise, he said again, softer now, I owe you everything. I should have never left. You raised our son with more love and courage than I ever could have. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. Zoe's attempt to humiliate me had failed spectacularly. The truth had surfaced, and with it came a reckoning she hadn't anticipated, one that changed everything for everyone present. The room was electric with tension, every guest holding their breath as Jackson took a deep, shaky breath. He looked around, his eyes darting nervously to the faces surrounding us, and then back at me. Everyone here deserves to know the truth, he began, his voice trembling but clear. Years ago, I made a terrible choice. I abandoned Louise when she became pregnant with Ethan. A murmur ran through the crowd, and I felt a strange mix of anger, relief, and vindication rising inside me. Jackson's words were heavy with regret, but also with the weight of long-buried secrets. I chose wealth, comfort, and status over love, he continued. I left her to raise our son alone, and I've carried that guilt every day since. The guests looked stunned, some whispering, others simply staring in shock. Zoe's face, once full of smug pride, froze in disbelief. Her carefully cultivated image of a perfect, untouchable family began to crumble right before their eyes. All the judgment she had cast on me, all the superiority she assumed over my modest life, now seemed painfully hollow. She realized that the woman she had mocked, the mother of her future husband, had endured far more than she ever could imagine, and with dignity. I stood quietly, my heart steady despite the waves of emotion crashing over me. I had never told Ethan the truth about his father. I had shielded him, raised him with love and sacrifice, and never let the shadow of abandonment define him. I did not speak of Jackson, not because I forgot, but because I wanted Ethan to grow strong, unburdened by the mistakes of the past. My silence had been a shield, protecting both of us. Ethan, still frozen nearby, finally spoke, his voice tight and raw. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, turning to me. I nodded softly, the truth no longer hidden. "Yes, Ethan, it's true. But that never changed what I did for you, what I gave you. You grew up strong, kind, and full of love, and that is what mattered." His eyes welled with tears as the realization hit him. The cruelty Zoe had displayed, her obsession with appearances, her subtle mockery, her disregard for my feelings, suddenly mirrored the worst parts of her father's choices. Ethan could see the pattern now, how entitlement and the need to assert superiority could harm those who were vulnerable. He looked at Zoe, who could no longer hide behind charm or smiles, and he understood something he hadn't before. The guests, still murmuring, began to take sides without speaking. Jackson's confession had torn open the illusion of perfection that Zoe's family had carefully constructed. Her image of superiority, of a flawless, elevated lineage, was now crumbling under the weight of truth. And the woman she had humiliated, me, stood tall, composed, and dignified. In that moment, I realized that the power of truth could outshine arrogance and cruelty. Zoe's carefully crafted image had fallen, and Ethan, finally seeing the full picture, was beginning to understand the depth of what I had endured. Secrets, once buried, had a way of rising to the surface, and when they did, they changed everything. The room was silent again, but this time it was the silence of recognition, of understanding, and of the quiet force of honesty that could never be denied. Ethan's face flushed with a mix of anger and disbelief as he stepped forward, his hands clenching at his sides. The room had been tense for minutes, with every guest waiting to see how he would respond. For too long, he had watched silent, as his mother endured slight after slight. Now, the weight of years of quiet observation and suppressed frustration was about to come crashing down. "Enough!" Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through the murmurs and whispers. Heads turned sharply, and even Zoe blinked in surprise. "Mom has done nothing but love, sacrifice, and support me her entire life. And you, Zoe," he continued, his eyes flashing toward her, "have the audacity to humiliate her in front of everyone." Guests murmured in agreement, some nodding subtly, as the reality of Ethan's words sank in. He stood tall, shaking off any fear of confrontation, and let his emotions pour out. "You care about appearances, about status, about how things look to other people. But love, respect, and family, that's what matters. And right now, Zoe, you've shown that you don't understand any of it." Zoe's lips parted, but no words came. Her carefully maintained composure faltered as Ethan's voice grew stronger. "You're not ready to be part of this family," he said firmly. "Not because of where you came from, not because of your wealth, but because your obsession with perfection and appearances makes you unfit to marry me, or anyone who actually cares about what's real." A hush fell over the room. Some guests whispered to each other, casting glances at Zoe with growing astonishment. Jackson, still pale from the revelations, looked between his daughter and the woman he had abandoned decades ago. Many of the attendees began quietly taking Louise's side, the contrast between Ethan's mother's quiet dignity and Zoe's arrogant cruelty impossible to ignore. I stood silently at first, watching Ethan take control of the moment. Then finally, after years of bottling up my pain, I allowed myself to speak. My voice was steady, though it carried the weight of decades of endurance. "Jackson," I said, looking him in the eye, "you left me to raise Ethan alone. I never complained, I never allowed that absence to harm him, but I lived with it every day. Every late night, every fear for his future, every sacrifice. You don't know what that felt like." Turning to Zoe, I continued, my voice calm but edged with authority. "And you, Zoe, made me feel small, invisible, and worthless tonight. You mocked me for the way I dress, the life I've worked for, the love I gave your fiancé. Do you know what it's like to raise a child alone, to work yourself to the bone so he could have a future, only to be treated like you're nothing?" The room was silent, every guest listening intently as I laid bare years of struggle and perseverance. Ethan stood beside me, no longer torn, fully on my side. Zoe's face was pale, her confidence shattered, as she finally realized that the woman she had tried to humiliate had endured far more than she ever could imagine, and had done so with strength, dignity, and unwavering love. In that moment, the balance of power shifted. The truth had emerged, and Ethan's defense, combined with my own voice, exposed the reality that no charm or wealth could mask. Respect, love, and integrity always outshine arrogance and cruelty. The aftermath of Ethan's outburst was immediate and undeniable. Zoe's carefully curated wedding, meant to be a flawless display of wealth and status, began unraveling before everyone's eye. Guests whispered to one another, some in shock, others in curiosity, as the weight of revelations sank in. Jackson's confession, Ethan's defense, and my own words had cast a shadow over the entire event. Conversations stopped mid-laugh, champagne flutes were set down, and a few people quietly excused themselves, leaving early. The air was thick with tension and unspoken judgment, and it felt as if the perfect image Zoe had so meticulously built was crumbling in real time. Zoe stood frozen, her face pale, her mouth opening and closing as if to say something, but no words came. The confidence she had worn so proudly now seemed fragile, almost brittle. Ethan turned to me, taking my hand firmly, and together we began to leave. Each step toward the exit felt like reclaiming a small piece of justice, a quiet defiance against the humiliation she had tried to impose. Guests turned to watch us go, some nodding subtly in approval, others still whispering, perhaps rethinking everything they had assumed about appearances, status, and family. As we reached the doors, I felt a mixture of relief and quiet satisfaction. I had endured years of subtle judgment and exclusion, but in this moment, I walked away with my head held high, unshaken by the cruelty that Zoe had displayed. Ethan's grip on my hand reassured me that the love and respect between us were stronger than any insult or attempt at public humiliation. Jackson, who had followed us partway, hesitated before speaking. His voice was tentative, heavy with remorse. "Louise, I'm so sorry. I should have." I turned to him, stopping him with a firm look. "No," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You made your choice years ago, Jackson. You walked away when it mattered, and no apology now can change the past. You don't get to rewrite history." His shoulders slumped, and I could see the genuine regret in his eyes, but I did not waver. My dignity had been my shield for decades, and I would not allow it to be compromised now. The humiliation Zoe had tried to inflict had failed spectacularly, and I refused to let anyone, not even her father, diminish the life I had built or the sacrifices I had made. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. The whispers and stares inside the reception hall no longer mattered. I had faced humiliation, deception, and cruelty, yet I had emerged standing tall, my integrity intact. I had reclaimed what was always mine, my dignity, my strength, and my right to be treated with respect. Ethan squeezed my hand gently, and I smiled at him, feeling pride in both of us. Zoe's attempt to control and humiliate us had failed. In the end, the truth had prevailed, and I had finally walked away with my head held high, leaving behind the shame, the judgments, and the false appearances. I would no longer be anyone's target. I was Louise, strong, dignified, and unshakable. In the days that followed the disastrous reception, the aftermath continued to ripple through everyone's lives. Ethan, after taking time to process everything, made a decisive choice. He filed for an annulment of his marriage to Zoe. It wasn't done out of anger alone, but out of clarity and principle. He couldn't marry someone who had so openly disrespected the woman who had given him everything, who had shaped him into the man he was today. He stood firmly by my side, protecting not just me, but the values I had instilled in him: honesty, loyalty, and love that wasn't measured by wealth or status. Zoe's family, once proud and untouchable in their social circles, began to feel the weight of Jackson's confession. The scandal surrounding his past decisions spread quietly at first, whispered from friend to friend, then more openly. People questioned the morals behind the facade of wealth and perfection Zoe's family had long projected. Invitations were rescinded, social gatherings became uncomfortable, and the aura of superiority that had once surrounded them slowly faded. It was a subtle, quiet form of justice, a reflection of how truth, when revealed, leaves no room for false pretense. For me, the days that followed were transformative. I no longer felt the need to hide behind quiet endurance or suppress the pride I had long held. The humiliation Zoe tried to inflict had failed, and in its place grew a sense of recognition and respect from those who had witnessed the events unfold. Friends, neighbors, and even distant relatives began to acknowledge the strength it took to raise a son alone, to maintain dignity in the face of judgment, and to endure years of subtle condescension without losing oneself. My quiet strength, once invisible, was now visible and undeniable. Reflecting on everything, I understood that the true revenge had never been about confrontation, shouting, or retaliation. It wasn't in trying to punish Zoe or her family directly. True revenge was the courage to live honestly, to expose the truth when the moment came, and to stand tall in the face of attempts to tear you down. Every insult, every slight, had been met with patience and grace, and when the truth emerged, it carried far more weight than any angry words ever could. It was dignity, maintained over years, that proved stronger than cruelty or arrogance. I think about that day often, and I ask myself what it truly means to be humiliated. Was I the family embarrassment that Zoe had shouted to a room full of people, or was I simply the mirror reflecting her own insecurities and the long-hidden failures of her family? I know the answer in my heart, but I leave the question open to those who hear my story. The people who judge, mock, or belittle often reveal far more about themselves than about their target. So here I stand, unshaken, proud, and free from the shame others tried to place on me. I am Louise, strong, dignified, and finally fully seen. And as I look back, I realize the greatest revenge isn't in destroying others. It's in exposing truth and refusing to let anyone diminish your worth. So, was I really the family embarrassment, or was I just the mirror showing them their own? You decide. What do you think? Did Ethan make the right choice by ending the marriage and standing by his mother, or should he have tried to make it work with Zoe? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to hear your take. And if stories like this resonate with you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss another one.